Greetings, fellow visitors. This is Upgrade Terminal, a Star of Providence fancast. I'm Malachi.
And I'm Nick. Welcome back to the facility.
So today we are joined by two guests, one new, one returning. I'll introduce our new guest to Upgrade Terminal first. Grayson Morley, welcome.
Hey, thank you. Happy to be here.
Grayson is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop and a winner of the Penn Dow Short Story Prize for Emerging Writers. His work has appeared in Polygon, Catapult, the Iowa Review, and Backlog, his video game newsletter that everyone should subscribe to. So I am a subscriber. I enjoy it greatly. Yeah, glad to have you here, Grayson.
Hey, I'm happy to be here, and thanks. You saved me to have to plug it myself, so appreciate it.
Well, we can plug it again later in the episode, but
oh, great.
Yeah. And Ruben. Yeah, Ruben, welcome back to Upgrade Terminal.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. This is fun.
A familiar face for those who listen to our podcast regularly.
Familiar face, ? Audio medium?
Familiar voice, let's say.
Well, we like to start the show by sharing something nice that happened to us this last week. Grayson, as our newest guest, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Something nice this past week. Where I live, we've kind of started inching towards spring, and it's been getting a little warmer, which makes, when we go on our dog walks, a little more pleasant than when it's like 20 degrees and bitter wind. So that was nice. We had Freya, my dog, and I had some nice walks this week because the weather's turning towards spring.
Oh, yeah. That's lovely. It's warming up a little here as well, and I've started going on more walks too. The biting cold has receded.
Yeah, I'm not really a summer person, so there's this brief window of spring and fall. Those are my seasons, so I'm happy.
Nice. Ruben, what about you?
Well, I was going to add similarly, like it's been really, really nice weather here, like spring weather for the last 4 days, I want to say. Like I just woke up one day and it's like, oh, it's 18 degrees Celsius. I was like, holy shit, I don't even need to wear a jacket anymore. That's nice. But then I looked at the forecast. Apparently, I only get to enjoy this for today, and tomorrow it's going to be back to the classic Dutch, like it's raining all the time. It's going to be snowy. There's an expectation of snow in March, which I'm not used to, so I'm going to be curious to see what that's going to be like. But I've been really enjoying the weather, too, the past few days.
Nice. Snow in March, huh?
Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be a bit weird because we didn't get any snow during January or February either. So it's really delayed.
Do you normally get a lot of snow?
No, I wouldn't say a lot. Usually you get snow for maybe a week a year, like usually around the peak winter. So this is very uncharacteristic. But yeah, I also if we're talking about things that nice things that happened this week, I think I might have mentioned it on the podcast before. I am a full-time student and I also work in the industry that I'm doing a degree for. But in January, if anyone's been a student, that's all the deadlines come home to roost usually. So I've been really busy for the past 2 months, I want to say.
Yeah.
But since this week and last week, I've had so much more free time. I've been playing actually games that I haven't played in a long time. I've played one of my favorites is I don't know if anyone knows what this is. I've played Okami again for the first time in
I've heard of it.
year. Yeah. That's one of the games where once I pick it up, I can't stop playing. I really am. I know it's one of my favorites, and a few other games too. So I know it's I just am appreciative of everything, basically.
Yeah, I look forward to being able to have some more game nights / afternoons with you in the next couple of months.
For sure.
Yeah, Okami's a great game. Very beautiful. And I think they just recently announced a sequel, didn't they?
They did, yeah.
It's in pre-production. They made a trailer for it, but the game is not being... I think it's about to be developed. I'm not sure.
That sounds right, yeah.
One of those trailers before the trailer of the trailer.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's going to look very different, I imagine, in the final cut. But I don't know. I look forward to it.
One would hope it is still just as beautiful as the original games, because that's part of the appeal of them.
Well, if the trailer's anything to go by, I don't know. It's the same director and all of the same staff too who made the original. So I am optimistic at the moment about the release of that game.
Yeah, that's very promising.
Nick, you want to go next?
Sure. Something nice that happened this week. So I'm always in the lookout for like cool new games to play, to enjoy. It's one of the things I enjoy in life the most. And I recently came across this interesting game called Regicide. Now, Regicide is a game that you can just play with a standard deck of playing cards. And it's this cooperative game where you have to defeat the face cards by playing cards, discarding cards, and activating the powers of the suits. And I've been really enjoying this game a lot. And in fact, I've taught this game to Ruben, and we've been playing a few rounds this week, as a matter of fact. And it's been delightful. It's so exciting to find a new game that you can play. And because you can play with a deck of cards, you can play it basically anywhere. You don't need any really specialized equipment. And it's also interesting from a design standpoint to see like how someone can design a game that is so compelling with like the traditional deck of playing cards. Like these components alone, you can make a great game out of them. And it's been fascinating. And also it means I get to play games with Ruben again, which is something we used to do quite a bit last year. And I'm hoping the Regicide sessions we've been having, are the start of like many more sessions of this and other games in the future.
It's an incredibly fun game. So much so, he taught it to me yesterday, and already I kind of looked for like physical versions of the game. I should mention you can play it with a standard deck of. There's a standard deck of cards, but we played it on Tabletop Simulator, where they've got like custom art for all the aces. Like some of them are animals, warriors, bosses, like cool looking bosses. And I found one that's like really cheap near a store that I live to, like very close to, so I might pick it up whenever I'm there next time.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I was like, wait, physical version? I was like, I have 3 in my house right now.
Yeah. Well, it's like the special version just has each and every single card, all 54, yes, including the 2 jokers, has unique art, so that when you play the game to play Regicide, it's very evocative and it sort of helps you to imagine what's going on.
Yeah.
And it's the excitement of like, I found this really cool new game and I can teach it to my friends and we can play together and we can share in the experience of how fun this is. I've dearly missed playing games with friends after all of the nonsense of the holidays with family stuff, and in my case, the beta testing of Star of Providence, which becomes a mostly single player thing. It's been really enjoyable to go back to like finding cool games and sharing them with friends.
Yeah, that's nice. And that Regicide sounds very cool. I'll have to check it
I
out.
can teach it to you later if you want.
Sure. Quick question. Did any of you have older relatives that thought face cards were evil?
No.
No, that's not where I thought that sentence was going.
Yeah, I just thought back to when I was young and I lived with my grandparents for a time, and my grandma would not let us have face cards in the house because like they're connected to gambling and the devil's connected to gambling.
Well,
I think that was her logic. I don't know.
By that logic, she should let you have none of the cards, not just the face cards.
Yeah, but she loved Yahtzee, so go figure.
Interesting.
Sure.
Did you grow up like learning common games and then you'd meet up with people and you'd be befuddled when they didn't remove the face cards?
Yeah, I'm like, wait, guys, Jesus doesn't approve of this game.
Interesting. No, mostly my family played euchre growing up, which when you're like 9 trying to learn euchre, it seemed incredibly boring at the time. But as I got older, I started getting more into it.
I've never even heard of that. Euchre?
It's a 4-player team-based card game where you're playing suits. There's trump cards and stuff like that. I couldn't come up with the rules off the top of my head, but it involved kind of like bluffing with your partner, but you couldn't directly speak about what it is you were trying to do. So like,
Ah.
imagine being 9, the youngest cousin on both sides, trying to like hold your own at a table with a game whose rules are a little mushy to begin with.
Yeah.
So that would be my childhood card game.
Huh. I'm gonna have to check out Regicide and Euchre.
Yeah, hit me up later.
So the nice thing that happened to me this week is a little self-indulgent.
Good.
But my son asked me, "Can I send you a poem I wrote?" And
Ooh.
this came out of nowhere. I'm just like, sure. I'm a big fan of poetry, and I was like really excited to read it. And holy smokes, he wrote 1, 2, 3, like 3 huge paragraphs is this poem. It's like a long form poem. And it was just exciting to me because my son's writing poetry. And so I wanted to share one line from it that I thought was really awesome.
All right.
It's his poem is kind of a combination of like absurdist humor, which is very Gen Z, you know, and also like lines of like prettier lines of poetry that I thought were really nice. But the line that was my favorite, it says, "Meteors flash by all night, the moths circling your backyard light. The nights start to cool. Slowly, slowly, the toadstools ascend."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very good.
I was I was kind of blown away because I wasn't expecting it. And he sends me this poem and I'm like, dang, there's some cool stuff in here, man. Yeah. So I'm hoping to encourage him. I got his permission to mention this on the podcast. I'm like, hey, do you mind if I mention it? And he looked at me like, what?
That's so nice.
Yeah. Anyway.
I feel like if your kid is like writing poetry, you've taken a few right turns in parenthood, so that's great.
I would agree.
I hope so. Yeah, I didn't know what the poem was going to be about. You know, it wasn't Fortnite though, so
hey,
that's a victory.
We'll take it.
Actually, he's never played Fortnite, so
Maybe that's the right turn you made.
Yeah, I was like, send it back to me when it mentions Star of Providence. Grayson, when we were talking about doing an episode together, you mentioned something to me that I've seen a lot of new players saying on Blue Sky and on Discord, that Star of Providence is really challenging.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it's something like once you've been playing a game for a long time, you kind of move away from that and forget how challenging it was in the beginning sometimes. But it certainly is really challenging. And so we wanted to bring you on to talk about your experience with it and bring on Nick and Ruben. Well, Nick's always here, but bring Ruben on as well to give some advice because they're both high-level players. So the first question I want to ask you is just what's your overall experience with roguelites and shmups in general?
Yeah, well, thanks again for letting me on into what I presume is an audience of really enthusiasts for this game. You know, I hope I don't sound like too much of a fool as we go on.
There are dozens of listeners, dozens.
There are dozens of us. Yeah, I think, you know, in terms of my experience with roguelikes and shmups, like right off the bat, I would say I definitely have more experience playing roguelites than shmups. So, you know, as we all know from playing games in 2025, roguelites and roguelikes, I've never quite known how to perfectly divide the two, but whatever. They've become more and more a popular genre, especially in the indie space. So I've played a lot of them as a person who, you know, writes about games. You know, obviously most of them tend to be kind of the ones that rise to the top of the heap in terms of, you know, what the press is paying attention to. So, you know, Hades obviously is a big one. Enter the Gungeon, Dead Cells, Binding of Isaac. Lost a lot of time to Balatro last year, obviously, like a lot of us.
So did I. Yep, so did I.
Yeah, I had to uninstall it. It was one of those ones where I just had to back away. It was too easy when it was on my laptop where I worked to just be like, I'll play a couple hands. You know, it was dangerous.
I'll play 3 entire runs and it's 2 hours later.
Exactly. But in terms of shmups, it's definitely like, you know, one of the things for me as a person who writes about games, you kind of come to understand yourself and your own kind of tastes in a really concrete way, as you have to like navigate a lot of different genres and figure out what resonates with you and what doesn't. And I've never been a person who can really hang with shmups, in the sense that I think it's actually one of my like weakest areas in terms of just like not just ability, but I've never really clicked really deeply with a shmup, which I think my first experience was I don't remember how old I was, but when Ikaruga came out on GameCube,
Yes.
my friend came over. He's like, "I got this game I want to show you," and um,
Did he have a glint? Did he have like a mischievous glint in his eye when he said that?
Genuinely, yes. No, I mean, like, yeah, like he looked like he was about to reveal like a secret to me, and we popped it in the GameCube, and as one does when you're a kid, you show it to your friend by like playing it and like watching him play. Frankly, it was beautiful watching him play, because he's just very adept at it, and the mechanic obviously there of swapping your ship's color to absorb bullets was kind of mesmerizing to watch him go through stages where he had already kind of known how to achieve that flow state that you have to have. And so I was like, wow, this is incredible. This looks amazing. And then he passed the controller to me, and the game looked very different in my hands than it did his. And it wasn't that it left a bad impression at all. Like, I still think, like it's one of those things where like when you watch someone play a shmup who has that level of skill and that level of kind of like just ability to parse the information that's coming at them, which is a ton of information. It's actually like almost like a dance, it's really wonderful to watch. But I never really through the years got into any shmups, and I'll be honest that there's a bit of intimidation from it.
That's understandable.
And I mean, we'll talk a little bit about this later, but like one of the things that I want to hear you all talk about, if you can even remember, is like I have this moment where I freeze, where like I get a little better at these things, but then you'll reach a screen where there's just so many bullets that I can feel myself physically just like pause, like my hands stop moving, my eyes stop moving, and of course you can't do that. So that's how I would say. Like I play a lot of roguelites. But in terms of shmups, it's really like, everybody's got kind of maybe a couple of genres that they really haven't gone down. Mine would probably be like shmups and 4X games. I don't have any experience in these things.
When I started playing Star of Providence, I had never played a shmup before either, and I felt the same way, and I still feel intimidated by shmups, actually, a little bit less so than before, but like hardcore shmups are different than roguelites in that you're not always collecting upgrades that are slowly making you more powerful as you go, and It's literally just dodging bullets for 10 to 30 minutes. But no, that's totally understandable. This is your second time playing Star of Providence.
Yeah,
I think you played it before the name change.
I did. I got in when it was Monolith. Yeah.
Yep. So you're coming back to the game after a huge content update, and do you feel any different from your first go around at all?
I mean, one thing was the first time around, I had to like create a custom controller scheme for the Steam Deck to make it work. It wasn't quite talking to controllers at the time, which worked fine. I would say now it definitely feels, you don't have to do any of that anymore. It definitely just, pick up and play. But beyond that, I still get the sense when I came back to it that I was so much still in the waiting pool of the game. I hadn't even gotten into the shallow end quite yet. That I don't notice that much different, but it also had been years, so I can't quite perfectly remember my old experience, but my sense, especially from watching some people, play it on stream, is that like I'm not even at, the loops yet. So, probably I have to imagine that's where you would notice more differences, but beyond the fact that it plays much easier with a controller now than before, I'll be real. I don't think I've noticed much of a change on my end.
Okay. Talk us through how far you've made it so far.
Embarrassing as it is to say, Sanctum has stopped me every time at this point.
It's not embarrassing at all for people who are new to the genre of shmups and the kind of skill set that they require, Star of Providence is still a gentle introduction, but it is still going to increasingly slowly demand more and more precision and attention from you. And that's completely fine. As it so happens, last night I got contacted by a friend of mine who, like, I haven't talked to in a while, but she was like, "Yeah, I just picked up Star of Providence again," because I'm like, "It's an update," and like, that's really cool. And she's like, "Man, I have trouble reaching the bellows. Even, it's really tough." And I'm like, "It's okay, it's fine. Like, it's for people who are not into the genre and who see this really cool game and they want to get into it. It is tough because it requires a certain, as you said, flow state for you to get into, and the game starts clicking. But the sensory overload it can provoke can
Yeah.
be challenging. So for some people, because it's just like there's so many things on the screen, so many bullets. What do I focus on? Where do I move? Do I shoot? And you just panic and you just either flail about or you just stand still, and both of those things cascade into failure. But
Yeah.
it's all right. There's no shame in struggling and in being a new player.
I appreciate it. I'm gonna tell a story here that I probably should have gotten my wife's approval for, but it reminds me. One time when she visited my hometown with me, I was teaching her to kayak. We have a couple of wooden kayaks that my dad has built over the years from kits.
Mhm.
And there was a moment where she was paddling, and it's on a lake, and whatever, the wind was pushing her in towards somebody's docked boat, and she kind of just froze and like stopped putting the paddle in the water, and I'm swimming alongside her, like giving her tips at the time. And so I grabbed the boat and kind of right it. And I was like, "What happened?" She's like, "Well, I just gave up. I figured I would crash into it." And so I, I laugh, but like truthfully, thinking about how I feel when I reach Sanctum, you know, so far it's felt like this kind of jump where I'll hit a room and suddenly there'll be enemies that are just like spewing bullets that are just coming out, and I'm like, oh, I gave up in the kayak. Like I'm giving up in the kayak. I've stopped paddling.
You're like, I'm gonna get hit.
I'm gonna
Here
get
it
hit. And obviously I know from playing difficult games over the years that like the answer is to first of all not give up, but also to kind of get comfortable in that kind of mental space of kind of like recognizing when you reach that new level of complexity where you're like, okay, this is requiring a little bit more of me than the previous level. How do I kind of grow into that new territory? So I guess it sounds like you all have played this game and other shmups quite a bit, but like one of my questions for you all might be like, do you have any like mental tips on getting past that kind of frozen in the kayak moment?
Oh yes, I've got great news for you, Grayson, because you've got 3 people swimming in the water, and we're going to guide your kayak through the bullets.
I'm ready. Guide me.
Ruben, why don't we start with you? Because I think you've played the most shmups out of
The three of us.
out of the 3
The
of us.
4 of us, really.
Yeah. So how do you get over to Grayson's question? How do you get over that?
Well, okay, like the way I approach all of like shmups or STGs, whatever you call them, is very like technical. If that makes any sense, like I see them as like puzzles to solve. Okay, here's like a pattern, and I want to make sure like I want to break it down so it's like as easy as possible for me to dodge it or have to like do as little improvisation on the spot. So I'm not going to tell this is like something you should do, but it is recommended by other shmup players. Like, I'll look back at your own gameplay and see what you've done. Like, if like freezing or panicking, like what happened there? Do you see like try to solve the situation? If you like look at again, like what are you doing, and then be like, okay, how could I have prevented this? But it's a very like what's the word I'm looking for here? Like mechanical, like way of looking at things. I don't think that approach is right for everybody, because some people like me, I really like looking analytically, but at like patterns and stuff like that. But for some people, it's more of like just getting used to it sort of deal. Like they just like doing full runs, getting the intuition for it, and just getting more comfortable with the game over time. But if you ask me personally, I usually uh, look back on a situation, like if I freeze or if I panic, I'll look back and be like, what could I have done better here? Is there an easier way to solve this or easier way to dodge this?
Right.
Are you talking about like looking at the bullet patterns themselves, Ruben?
Yeah, like okay, I hope I don't get too technical here, but basically most bullet hell patterns can be divided into like three categories. One we describe as just random, like the point from where it's shooting, it just goes in every direction, and you have to just
Mm-hmm.
like dodge it randomly. Some we call static, where the pattern always is aimed the exact same way. There's like a route you can see through it, like the boss is in the same position when you shoot it. And then there's patterns that are called aimed patterns, where the bullets go like usually in your direction, or at least the player's like ship position is
Oh, okay.
depends like influences where the bullets are going to go. And once you can kind of like put a pattern into one of these three boxes, you can kind of start thinking like, well, I almost feel like I need a visual example for this. Sorry, but like there's some ones where you can kind of just look at it back and be like, well, I could make like a really fancy dodge, like go in between like these two and these two and these two, but maybe just tapping. Like tapping is what we call like making small adjustable moves. So like tap to the right, tap to the right, tap to the right, like
Mm-hmm.
really small, not that difficult to execute, and very consistent ways of like finishing something.
Mm-hmm.
The more you can simplify, like a pattern or a boss or any kind of attack, really, um, it makes it a lot more digestible, and then you're not scared of it anymore. You know what's coming up, and you're like, well, I've got the solution for this. Bring it on.
Yeah.
Random, static, and aimed.
That's usually how we refer to it. And it can
I'm
be
taking notes
like,
over here.
yeah. Well, there's sometimes you've got like static patterns that also have like a random element. Like this, you have ones that shoot at you, and then there's like bullets in the back that are random. So there's usually a mix of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that is how people who like analyze these things, they'll usually be like, okay, this is a static pattern, so you can just sit here. This is an aimed pattern, so just tap a couple of times, so you'll always dodge it. But that's the very analytical way of doing it. I was gonna head over to Nick. Like, is there in your experience, because you don't play a lot of shmups, like if you get to a pattern that's like you get stuck on, or you're kind of like fear, like out of fear, like what am I supposed to do here? Is there like I don't know, like how do you approach it if that's something like that happens?
I don't know if my advice can compare to yours in an analytical manner. And the thing is, since I am not, how do I word this? Well, when I started playing Monolith, as it was back then, I was not a shmup player, and I am still not a shmup player, but I was a bit more of a roguelike player. So the way that I played was more or less, well, I may not be able to dodge all these patterns, but I am able to call upon my skills with resource management, doing things in certain order, collecting bonuses, stacking upgrades that I know will give me benefits or they have synergies. That's kind of how I could accumulate enough resources that I could just kind of get by. It's like, you know, oh, I might take 15 damage to Overlord, but if I have 20 health, that's fine. I still get to win, and that's one way to do it. Is like you can leverage resource management in this game, at least. I'm not saying this is true for all shmups, but in
Hmm.
Star of Providence, you can use resource management and using the roguelike elements to sort of create a loadout in which you have the resources to withstand or survive a lot of tricky encounters. However, this is not exactly the best long-term solution because eventually you will have to actually learn how to dodge things, and that's the tricky bit. So there's a couple of things that I do or that I have done.
Mm-hmm.
Ruben has already mentioned, studying patterns. Like what I would do is, for instance, I would practice boss fights, or even against normal enemies. I would like isolate the enemy if it's like in a normal room, or if it's a boss, and just watch it. Just watch the attacks. Literally, just don't shoot. Don't worry about shooting or aiming. Just watch what it does. Understand, okay, it is going to do this attack. The bullets go in this direction. They come at this speed with this angle. And also, okay, what is the tell? Like, some certain bosses will move a certain way, or there will be a certain warning telling you this is what it's about to do. Be like, right, I have to remember those. I have to remember when the boss does this thing, it means it's going to get this attack. And I have to be ready for it. I have to be positioned in this part of the screen, or I have to be ready to dodge with a certain arc. So, and like sometimes in zooms, also just watch enemies, just watch their behavior, see, okay, how many bullets they shoot, how often are they shooting me when they can see me? If they teleport, how are they teleporting? All of these little things that's helped me understand what will the enemies do. And
I'm imagining doing a couple runs, like sort of like Pokemon Snap. It's like, all right, I'm gonna hide over in the corner. I'm gonna observe this fire mage
and like,
see.
actually, that's not a bad comparison, right? Because you're going to be fighting rooms for most of the game. It would serve you very well to understand, okay, if I see this enemy, I know how it will react. And the other thing that quickly becomes important is something called something that I would call enemy priority, which is like, if you see a big room and has lots of enemies, what is the biggest threat? What do I need to take out first? Because sometimes you have like little ghosts, which are not really very threatening, but maybe they're kind of serving as cover for like a bigger thing behind that's actually going to give you a lot of trouble. So it's a matter of like, well, if the ghosts chase me, I can kind of lure the ghost in such a way so that I have a clear shot at the bigger enemy that's going to actually give me trouble. Or sometimes, the room layout is in such a way that these enemies are not going to be a problem yet, so I can focus on the smaller enemies that are going to be a threat now, and then later I can deal with the bigger threat.
Yeah.
A lot of this is just observation and not exactly memorizing exactly things, but developing an intuition for what the threats in front of you are going to do, and having a not exactly a full plan, but a sort of a knowledge base of like, okay, against these enemies, this is the tactic I should do, etc., etc.
We did an episode about of advice from the community a long time ago now.
In season 1, yes.
Yeah, and the advice I got that helped me the most, Grayson, was look at the space between bullets and not the enemies and the bullets themselves. And so that's helped me a lot, as I'd just be like, okay, I'm just gonna look at where I can move my ship. And I practiced not looking right at the enemy, because I'd usually be looking at the enemy, but anyway.
No, it's your turn to give advice, Malachi. What's your advice for Grayson?
No, that's it. That's literally it. That's what I would give.
It's a really good piece of advice, though. Like, one of the few first things you learn when picking up trumps like this is like, where do you look on the screen? And okay, I wouldn't say it's like applicable everywhere in Star of Providence. Usually people say, don't look at the enemy, look slightly ahead of the ship. So you can see the ship in like your peripheral vision, but you're focused on the bullets that are almost there for use. Like, that's usually the thing that most people find comfortable looking at. But definitely don't look, especially boss, like they're usually static, right? So you just put your cursor, if you're playing with mouse and keyboard, or you just like, you learn what to aim and then you just forget about it. It dies when it dies, basically.
I think what's interesting about kind of like all three of your advice on this is it reminds me a lot of like, I don't know why all my metaphors are water-based today. I didn't plan for this, but I was a swimmer growing up. That was my sport. And like one of the things I did in high school was I kind of hit a wall with my time. I just couldn't improve my time. And so I ended up going to this guy that kind of, we did a lot of videotaping and kind of like looking at my technique on a really kind of point by point level of like, okay, here your arms 90 degrees. You want it to be a little bit more 45. Here your hands entering the water a little too close, a little too far away from your head. You want to bring that into your body. And
Wow.
I don't think it's an accident that when we think about games, especially shmups, there's a level, truthfully, I think, of athleticism to them that's coming out in kind of like what you're all talking about, which is you are drilling certain things, whether or not you're explicitly, not shooting the enemy and just practicing dodging, or whether you go into a run saying, okay, I'm just going to focus on being in between the bullets, or I'm dividing the patterns in my mind. It's the same thing as kind of like drilling whatever physical activity that you're attempting to get better at and breaking it down into kind of smaller parts. So it makes sense that your tips would, I think it makes sense that they would align with kind of how you would want to improve a physical activity. If you were like, whether it was running, swimming, whatever, you would try to focus on one individual element of the full motion. And I think each of you gave, a really helpful tip in that regard of like, what are the fundamentals of what it is I'm doing here versus maybe my next question is more of a kind of gameplay based thing, which is like, are there general kind of like upgrades or even cartridges that you think are better for beginners than others in terms of just like getting over the hump? Like, I mean, obviously that's a big question. There's a lot of different things, but like, it stands to reason that I should not be getting hit, so I should be getting the damage upgrades. But in terms of when you actually get the choice of the three, are there some that you feel are better for newer players than others when you get to the upgrade terminals?
I'm thinking about this.
I'm inclined to say, well, we can discuss this, but I'm inclined to say extra POW is one of these.
Mhm.
Like one of the
which
things
is the upgrade that gives you one extra rechargeable bomb.
yes,
Got it.
And makes it so that when you bomb, the blocks around you get destroyed.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the part we care about here is the extra bomb. I notice whenever I watch like a newer player stream the game, they've learned from other Roguelikes, bombs are like this limited resource that you should only use when the time really comes. Like during dungeon, you always use it during boss fights because you need the round. What the master round?
The
That's what they're
blanks,
called in
the
the game.
Blanks.
The blanks, yeah. But in Star Prophet's the exact opposite. Not using them is such a waste. They regenerate over the course of just doing rooms over the course of playing. So if you have one, please use them. It's going to save you so much HP. And in that spirit, I think having an extra one, going from 2 to 3, is quite a big help, especially later in the game when you've got 3 saved up and like getting a couple of rooms that are difficult. You can just be like, don't care, shift. I don't know what you've got the bomb key like assigned to, but that's always what I always use.
So, go ahead.
I was gonna say this is helpful because I'm definitely the person who is just hoarding bombs for no reason. So that was a good tip for me.
No. I need to go next. Okay, so Grayson, I don't know if you know this, but I in February, well, actually in January, I wrote a guide for Star of Providence regarding the basics of the game, which I then published in February. And one of the points I put a lot of emphasis on, that I stress very purposefully, is it can be hard for newer players to understand how useful bombs are and how aggressively they should be used. Because, again, as Ruben said, new players will tend to hoard bombs for bosses. It's like, but it's the big scary boss fight and I want to defend myself. And this is all predicated on the assumption that those bombs that you see on your HUD, those are the only ones you're getting, and maybe some you find in the shop. That's not true. You will regenerate bombs if you're low on bombs. The game will give you thirds of bombs as you clear rooms. So it's a renewable resource for free. It costs you nothing. You just have to play the game and you will get them. So bombs are very, very useful, extremely useful. Now, going back to like the point of your question, which is like what upgrades or what cards would be useful for new players, I would say, well, if you're taking extra POW, you might want to take auto bomb with it, because auto bomb means that you automatically use up your bombs when you have enough of them. If you have both of them combined, you will automatically bomb when you take damage, and you will recharge that extra bomb so you can have another free hit. So that gives you a lot of safety. I will still say this is a safety net that you should eventually, in the long term, sort of grow out of, because
Sure.
the point is that once you learn how valuable bombs are, you don't need an upgrade that will do that for you. You learn to do it yourself, and then you can clear up that slot for other important upgrades, such as salvage. Salvage is very strong upgrade. It is such a strong upgrade. Salvaging weapons is such an important mechanic.
Well, salvage, the upgrade itself, what does it do specifically?
So, normally in the game, if you have a weapon equipped and you equip a new weapon on top before it runs out of ammo, the game will give you some money and 1 HP just for replacing the weapon. If you have the salvage upgrade, it doubles the amount of money you get, and on top of the 1 HP, you will get another HP or sometimes an increase in max ammo. So it's basically giving you additional rewards every time you do the salvaging mechanic. And this adds up very quickly, especially if you see a floor and you got 3 weapons, suddenly you can be 4 or 5 extra HP from salvaging, and that's huge and a lot of money. So salvaging alongside actually using the salvaging mechanic, very powerful. Also, getting fortune early is a big deal. Getting fortune on floor 1 is such a delight to see, because you get extra resources for free. Like, it can be difficult to understand the value at first because you get nothing up front, but over the course of the run, that, oh, I got an extra HP, oh, I got extra ammo, oh, I even got a little bit of damage here, that adds up over the course of the run. So that's actually very useful. Malachi, do you have any upgrades or cartridges that you would recommend?
In the beginning, I would recommend Scanner, actually, because Scanner
Really?
reveals a lot of room locations and it shows you enemy HP. And I think just recently, when I've been watching new players play the game, they've found it really helpful to plan their route through the levels, and have a better handle on what rooms they should do first. Like, where should I go to get the upgrade first? Where's the shop? And sometimes it even reveals the secret room to you, which is good. And then for cartridges, I would just say the best one I'd recommend, Grayson, to always take is Contract.
Yes.
Have you found that one yet?
I don't know if I have. It doesn't sound familiar.
So Contract lets you hire a little wise guy, one of the enemies from the game, and he will help you out. He will help you fight everything. And his damage is the same as the players. Actually, I feel like he's nerfed now.
So, to clarify, so the damage stat that you see in the game, that will also boost the little wise guy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if the base damage value has been tweaked.
I feel like it has, because it seems like it's nerfed. But anyway, he helps you. And what's really cool, Grayson, is sometimes you can be taking cover from bullets and he doesn't take damage. So he can just go out there and help you chip away at the enemies. It's really, really powerful.
This is the help I need.
Whenever I get Contract, I always feel less lonely, because then it's like, I've got a little guy with me. The downside is you collect less scrap because you have to pay him. So he's taking his cut of the money you get from each room, but it's totally worth it, in my opinion.
We respect someone who knows their worth.
Yeah.
He deserves that.
He's working in the gig economy, and we're gonna pay him fair and square. He's helping a lot. Well, do you have any other questions, Grayson?
No, I don't think so. I mean, truth be told, a lot of where I'm at with Star of Providence is really unique to kind of just how I have to play games these days, as someone who, writes about. I write 2 monthly columns for Polygon, and then I have my newsletter that I keep up for myself. I kind of have to approach games on a level where I kind of have to sample them and move on in order to just keep moving. But I will say, even in the midst of that, I keep coming back and playing a round or two of Star of Providence, because it I don't think I'm ever going to get particularly good at it, but I think the combination of the aesthetics, when it comes to just the visuals, the color palette that they use, the music obviously is incredible. Even if I'm not particularly good at it at present, I find that I enjoy the time that I spend with it, which I don't always feel about roguelites, and some of them feel a little more punishing than others. So what I think has been interesting for me about Star of Providence is that I harbor no illusions that I'm going to get really good at it, given the way that I have to kind of play a lot of different types of games in order to keep up with my writing obligations. But the time that I do spend with it always feels really pleasurable. I think it kind of reaches this level of challenge that might, take other games like a while to ramp you up to. And I get the sense that Star of Providence trusts that the player wants to be there, if that makes any sense. And isn't afraid to really ratchet things up and say, okay, this is the new challenge that you have to overcome. So, no, I don't have other questions other than if you could find more time in my life for Star of Providence for me, that would rule.
Do you mind if I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
So we've been talking a lot about Star of Providence as like a game and the challenge and the mechanics and all of the more technical aspect of like these are the things you do to get good at the game. If I may ask, what do you like or appreciate about Star Prof that is less about the mechanics and the gameplay and more everything else?
I think this is a really silly thing to point out, but
Please go ahead.
The fact that the game really commits to what feels almost like an arcade cabinet, like aspect ratio, brings this like instant nostalgia to me of like going to the arcade with my dad and seeing him like play games that he was much better at than I was. And it's such a kind of silly thing to point out, but it is a deliberate aesthetic decision that developers have made to kind of vertically present it. And I think even that small thing, like when they did the update and then they had, I think these were new, the kind of like art that would show up alongside the kind of vertical. I turned it off, I'm sorry to say, because I really liked the minimalism of just feeling like I'm in this like tight little arcade cabinet, is how it feels. And I think that really complements the vibe of the game, the way it feels to play. And the art was beautiful, to be clear, that they added to it. But like, I really liked the kind of no nonsense, you are in the middle of the screen approach that it has by default.
Yeah. Ruben, one question for you really quick is, since you played the most shmups, is there another shmup? I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there another shmup that you'd recommend for Grayson or for players that are new to shmups that's a good introduction besides Star of Providence?
I wish I could give you an answer. This is one of those things where this is so hotly debated among circles, like what is the best beginner shmup? And I used to be very active in this conversation, and now I'm like, well, if someone asks me something like this, I'll share them like very different, like 5 very different types of shmups or different developers, different eras, and I'm gonna try to see which one ever they think is the coolest, and that's the one that they should play.
Oh, okay.
So you're saying your advice would be you would prefer to give more personalized advice of like, okay,
Yes.
what sort of things do you like? Okay, from that I can recommend you this, and this to get started.
But approaching shmups from like I am going to get good at these and learn all the like that's not how anybody ever like gets into these kinds of things. There was a oh my god, I'm gonna blank on the name. There was a like very famous fighting game like Twitch streamer who got interviewed like at Evo, I think like maybe a couple of weeks ago, and he got asked the same question. He was like, "Well, I would just recommend like what's a good like fighting game beginner entry for people." He was like, just pick whatever one you think looks coolest. Which one do you think like has the nicest looking characters? Which one do you think has the fanciest combos? Like the way people get into these things is because they find something that they think is really cool. Like, oh, like this ship shoots lasers that look like onion rings, or this one shoots like Ikaruga is another example of that. Like it is immediately interesting, like the concept of it for most people. That's why I think that game is so popular compared to maybe a lot more traditional games that, even though I like them more, they don't have that immediately like wow appeal, right? Like to get people into these games, you need to find something that they really love to just look at, to play moment to moment, and then if you stick with it, you'll eventually get better at them.
So
That's great advice.
You would be saying that it is not necessarily as important, the assessment of like, oh, well, how does the difficulty grade on such and such merits? And more like the fact that you are playing a game that you think is cool will give you the motivation that you need to overcome the challenges it puts in front of you.
Always, yeah.
So basically, just find cool games and just play them and get as good at them as much as you want.
Find cool games and play them.
There are like this
Honestly,
shmup,
great
like,
advice.
There's like this the shmup top 25 forum, like people vote for their favorites and stuff. But again, I usually tell people to be like, well, there's like a couple of very different ones, and just see which one appeals to you most.
Mhm.
That's how I do it. It's one of those topics that it's so hotly debated among like in community like discussions, like what is the best beginner shmup, and nobody ever can give like a really great answer for this. Like the closest we've come to is like Toho 8, but even then I'm like, oh, whatever. Just try whatever you think is cool.
So, Grayson, I didn't want to have you on and not talk to you about your writing. I read Backlog. This is how I came to know of you. The first one I read was the piece on Minute, and I highly recommend that one to people. I felt very seen by it. But can you tell us a little bit about Backlog and how it came to be?
Sure. First of all, I have to say, really appreciate you reading from all the way back then. I have no idea how you found me, but you've been very supportive of Backlog from the start. So I appreciate it. Backlog came out of a place where I wanted to get some experience writing about games. I have to back up a little bit. It was during a period of my life where I had a job that just really wasn't working out. And I was trying to think of like what else I could be doing to make a living. And at the time, I reached out to Chris Plant at Polygon, the editor-in-chief at Polygon, who I'd been in touch with years ago because I had turned an article that he wrote for The Verge at the time into a short story, and that short story ended up winning an award. And so that was my weird way of like basically cold emailing somebody who, has no obligation to speak to me. But at the time when I was trying to switch things up, I cold emailed him again and said, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but I did XYZ. Do you have any tips for kind of breaking into games writing? And his tip was to just like start a blog, start writing things regularly, so that, as you pitch and try to freelance, which can be a really discouraging experience in the sense that there's a lot of people who, you're in, I don't want to say competition with, but, at the end of the day, like there's only so many freelancing opportunities. And so in order to kind of get your sea legs, so to speak, he said, start a blog. And at the time, Substack was becoming a thing. And so I just was like, this seems easy to do. I'll start a Substack. I just started writing, and some of the early ones are not so good. Just because of the nature of, when you start anything new, whether it's, writing or even a new roguelite, I think you have to keep your expectations low, and you're there to learn. And then I think over the course of maybe the first year, I kind of figured out like what it was I was doing with it. Eventually years later, I migrated it over to Ghost, away from Substack, just to power the kind of back end of it. But I still, I've been doing more and more freelancing since then, but Backlog really, I think, is my most personal games writing. Because I don't have an editor there, I can kind of, say what I want. I try to do it within good taste, but there's nobody who's telling me to tone it down. So it remains a place where like I like to think about how games affect me as a person versus, I can't really publish that on Polygon as much because that is, the audience has different expectations there. They don't really want to, they don't want to read your personal blog. That's not what they're there for, So Backlog started out of a desire to get more experience with games writing. And I think I'm still keeping it going as a means of just like thinking about how games fit into my life and what they mean to me as a person.
Yeah, that is what really drew me in about your writing, is that I think for most players, right? I mean, I read Polygon, I like Polygon. Um, but a lot of times, if you're working full time doing that, like you play more games than anybody else has any time to,
Mhm.
right? And you're just constantly playing new things. And so reading Backlog, and it was from this angle of like, hey, games, I have to find a way to slot them into my busy life.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
like just the fact that that reality is reflected in your writing was really refreshing to me, because it's like, yeah, that's how I feel. And so yeah, I think people should definitely check it out, and I think that they'll find a lot to like. And I think there's a lot of like universal thoughts and feelings that people will identify with, of like, oh yeah, this kind of thing, I've felt something similar in my life as well. So but yeah, I've really glad that you're continuing to write it, and I'm going to keep supporting it. I really like what you're doing, Grayson.
Well, I appreciate it. I think one of the things that when you write on the internet or really make anything on the internet, that you're never sure, like, is anyone engaging with this? So you kind of have to do it for the love of the game. But I do appreciate, all the support you've shown over the years, and just being it's, as a writer, it's really, it's lovely to have readers, because I think, it's, to a certain extent, I would be doing this whether or not there are readers, but of course, at the end of the day, you want it to resonate with people. So I'm glad it does for you. And for anybody who's interested, the URL is just Backlog Mag, M-A-G, backlogmag.com. Obviously, Backlog was taken when I went to do that. So, think Backlog magazine, even though it's online only. So yeah,
Digital magazine. Yeah, no, we'll definitely be linking it in the show notes so people can
Great.
check it out.
Everything that you're saying about like writing and doing it for the passion, all the thing, it mirrors what we're doing with Upgrade Terminal. Like,
Yeah.
we're not doing this because like we think it'll be a hit. We're doing it because we love the game,
Yeah.
and
We're all shouting into the void.
yeah, and like we would like it if it resonated with people, though we know we don't have the largest of audiences. But you know what? That's not why we do it.
Well, I mean, the thing is, like, the writing advice I used to get from people was like, you'll drive yourself nuts trying to make something that you're imagining a giant audience for. What instead you want to be doing is, who's one person I'm making this thing for, and would they be pleased with it? And I think for a lot of people that might be a loved one, but like, I think especially with like enthusiast stuff, there's another you out there. There definitely is. There's somebody who's as into whatever it is you're into, and that's, I think, the pleasure of the internet has a lot of bad things going for it, but the good thing that it has is the ability to connect people across the globe, with what seems like maybe niche interests. But then you feel a little less alone.
Absolutely. Well, in your first answer, you kind of answered my second question, which was, I was going to ask you about your short story Brent, Bandit King, which I'm assuming is the one you said won the award, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So that was based, inspired by a piece by Chris Plant?
Yeah. So this is funny. I mean, life is funny, right? Like, I was in graduate school at the time, at the Iowa Writers Workshop, and it's a really interesting place for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is, like, it's the most writers I've ever been around in my life. Like, there are like 50 fiction writers and 50 poets there at a given time. And so that's a lot of people who, like you, as you get there, are like, some degree of introverted person who likes to spend their time making things up, right? But every week you would put things up for a workshop. Well, not you wouldn't personally. Every week there was a workshop where two people had their work read and discussed, and so like 2 or 3 times a semester, you would have to put up a piece of your work in progress for people to read.
Oh wow, that sounds a little.
Yeah, I mean, it's got its pluses and minuses. I will say I'm glad I'm done with that degree. But I remember at the time I was writing these stories that were like fine. I think I was going for this kind of like suburban realism type thing, kind of some kind of working class vibe from my upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
And they were all right, and they were getting all right feedback. But then I kind of hit a point, I think it might have been my second semester there, where I was just like, I'm just going to write something that's like for me,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, go back to like, who you're writing for. I'm like, I'm going to write a video game story that's just for me. And I'm going to put it up for workshop, and it's going to go terrible. And that's just going to be something that I do, And at the time, Chris Plant had written an article on The Verge that I think you can still find, that was specifically about a bug in Fallout 4, where you could get stuck in an elevator and he couldn't get out of the elevator, and it prevent, like, you could load an earlier save, but it was a mission critical elevator, and for some reason he couldn't escape it, and it kind of stopped his progress of it. And me being the literary sicko that I am, I'm like, oh, that's like, you could make a Cask of Amontillado type story out of that. You could make a Poe-like story out of somebody who is trapped in a video game elevator. And so I very quickly came up with this idea to narrate a story from the point of view of a game that's getting bored with its hyper-violent player, and is like trying to get him to do more interesting things, talk to more people. Maybe don't shoot the bandit on sight. Maybe think a little bit about his background. And the fun of the story ended up being using a lot of video game terminology for kind of repetitious and comedy reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a section where it's just like, you have shot the irradiated rat. You loot one irradiated rat bone and one, gold coin. You have shot another irradiated rat. You have shot a third irradiated rat. And the comedy is just in repeating very video gamey terminology. And so I wrote it, and I'm like, this is funny to me. And I put it up to workshop, being like, I'm going to get panned. Everybody's going to think I lost my mind. Cause like the last thing I turned in was like about working at Lowe's or something, like it was not that.
So it was a drastic shift in genre and tone.
It really was, to the point where I'm like, are my friends going to, check in on me? And then, contrary to my expectations, people really dug it. They thought it was funny. Somebody said, the phrase that stuck with me was, it was as if Halo began to speak. And I was like, okay, I can work with that. And anyway, I ended up, my editor who worked on it ended up at the Brooklyn Review, where it was published, submitted it to Pen America. Does this yearly prize for 12 people's first published short story. This was my first published short story. And they pick 12 every year as like the best debut stories, and put them in a book together. And yeah, again, much to my surprise, I was like, well, okay, somebody published it and gave me a very small amount of money for it. But that's how it goes in this world. I was, genuinely taken aback that it ended up winning in 2018. I remain proud of that story. It's when I was still teaching creative writing, I often encourage students to just kind of like write the thing you want to read. And that comment might come off as like trite or whatever. But I think it's true, whether it's you're making a podcast or you're writing a blog or you're writing something, like, the world has enough of what everybody thinks it needs. So you may as well just do the thing that's like pleasurable to you. And I think that story probably had the successes that it had simply because I let go a lot of what I thought I should be doing and just kind of, followed my own sense of what would be fun or interesting.
I mean, to some extent, I would say, like, if you're not writing what you want to exist, if you're not writing the thing that you wish existed, why are you writing it?
Yeah.
To make money, Nick. But I do agree with the advice, and I think it's good advice. It's an awesome short story, and we'll link to that in the show notes as well, as long as that's okay.
Oh yeah, no.
Okay, because it's still published on the Brooklyn Review.
Yeah. Please read it. That's a fun. I still like it. So
yeah, it's very fun. I also wanted to ask you, you recently finished the first draft of a novel, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. You've been reading my blue sky.
Is there anything you can tell us about it?
Sure. First and foremost, don't hold your breath. I still have to sell it, but it's a novel about delivery work and automation and to some extent video games. So my dad
sold.
Yeah. Oh, great. There's my first sale. My dad was a UPS driver for I think he did 31 or 32 years before he retired. He retired young because he started young. And so, I grew up hearing a lot from him about that line of work. And so in a certain way, it's kind of building off of that. But I spoke to a lot of different delivery workers. But the thrust of the novel is kind of this, I'm taking these kind of pre-existing technologies of like worker tracking software with GPS, how they gamify it to kind of encourage you to be a little faster, this next run, so to speak. Tomorrow on your next run, your challenge is to be a little more efficient than before. And I kind of extrapolate this satirical comedy out of it where I'm accelerating the use of these technologies to this point where, they want to launch this fully automated driver, but what's really happening is there's actually behind the scenes, there's a guy who has developed something called Delivery Simulator. People are, they're using kind of gamer data in conjunction with real world data to kind of fake it until they make it, basically. And, so it's a workplace comedy, if you want to call it that, about delivery work, but also the ways in which I think video games and labor have found a kind of unholy union, I think, with, efficiency tracking software where they gamify basically trying to make workers always be faster, always move a little quicker, always be more efficient, to the point where people are either hurting themselves or burning out or being, replaced by the very data that they're creating. So the working title is Delivery. I'm hopeful that my agent doesn't think it's terrible, so we'll see how that goes. But at the very least, it is something that I feel like is something that I would want to read, and has been fun to write, except for the next time I write a book, I'm going to do a lot more pre-planning than I did for this one, because the revision phase was a lot of fixing and making things match up with each other that was probably could have been avoided if I'd done a little more kind of outlining before. But yeah, that's my novel about robots and video games and delivery work.
Totally not inspired by any recent events in the world.
No. If any lawyers listening, it's totally off the top of my head and has nothing to do with anything in the real world.
Yeah, that sounds like a really compelling intersection of those ideas. So that's really exciting.
It sounds like it could be a bit of a dark comedy at times.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't call it light, but yeah. I do try to go for the absurdism, of what it feels like to work any job really these days. There's a kind of absurdity in it.
So true. Yeah. So true. Well, the last questions I have for you, Grayson, I'm just really curious what you're currently playing and what you're currently reading, if you have anything to recommend to the audience.
Yeah, definitely. Obnoxiously, one of the things I'm currently playing is under embargo, so I'm hoping to be able to talk about it soon. But let's just say, if you're a fan of my one polygon piece, this is not a review of the Stanley Parable Ultra Deluxe. It might have something to do with that one.
Now I'm interested.
Yeah. I'm hoping that I get to write about that when I have an idea. But otherwise, I'm in the very, very early portions of Avowed right now, which I'm kind of enjoying in a leisurely way. Just kind of playing it a little bit in the background as I sort through other things. But yeah, I love a pretty open world kind of RPG with fun dialogue options. I'm only about 6 hours in, so I can't make too many pronouncements on what I think of it, other than it's definitely drawn me in. So yeah, Avowed.
Yeah, I know there was a lot of positive coverage on Aftermath for Avowed.
Yeah, I'm digging
making me
it.
want to making me want to dive in.
It's I'm a recent Game Pass person to just be able to like sample some things a little bit. And so, it was obviously nice that it popped up there so I could kind of dabble in it a little bit and try that out. So, yeah. And then reading wise, I'm in the middle of The Bright Sword by Lev Grossman, which is like an Arthurian epic. It was published last year. And I don't actually read all that much fantasy these days, but this one really grabbed me. I think, despite the fact that it is a nearly 700-page book, it's taking me forever to read. But I find that he really paces the chapters in such a way that you can kind of read for 20 minutes before bed at night and get a really like solid little adventure out of it as the larger story is being told. So it's it's a long book, but I've found that it keeps your attention on these kind of micro bursts. So I really like that. And then I also finished a book called Hum by Helen Phillips, Hum, Hum.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a kind of literary sci-fi book about this kind of hyper commodified future where there are these humanoid robots that are always advertising things to you, and everything's gig work. And, it's hard to make a living when most of the work has been automated. And the novel starts with a woman taking a job to have her face modified by one of these hums so that she can kind of not be clocked by surveillance technology. Like they do this to test whether it can get around the surveillance technology that powers the world's like payment system.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not really a body horror guy, so even that little bit made me a little squeamish. But the rest of the book was less about that and more about just like her life with her family in this kind of dystopian future. So
wow,
do recommend that too.
Awesome.
Yep.
Oh, well, thanks for the recommendations.
Yeah.
Grayson, thank you again for being willing to come on to our extremely niche podcast and talk about this game.
Hey, I appreciate being invited, as someone who is not too deep, but, I'm happy that you all took the time to kind of give me some early tips. I'm hopeful for my next run.
We wish you the best of luck down in the facility.
Thank you.
Yeah, again, we'll be linking
Everything.
Yeah, basically everything
it.
that we mentioned, it'll be in the show notes. So definitely take some time to check out Grayson's work. Thanks so much for listening to our Star of Providence fancast. Big thanks to Garoslaw and AlexMdle for allowing us to use their music and sound effects.
You can find and check out all of the Star of Providence soundtracks in the Bandcamp, Volume 1 and Volume 2, which recently was expanded to include all of the tracks from Into Oblivion.
If you have any comments or suggestions for the show, you can reach out to us on our Discord server. We'll post the server link in the show notes.
And there you will find fellow pilots to talk with and discuss the show. Thank you so much to both our guests, Grayson and Ruben, for being with us on this episode.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Well, thank you.
This is what you came for, isn't it?
So be it.